Sometimes cards can make some really fun decks, but they just don't stack up competitively. Unfortunately, Bellossom is one of those cards. I've always been a sucker for the Flower Dance type of attacks in the TCG, like your Night March decks, or even the really bad Quick-Attune archetype from Diamond and Pearl, where essentially you just deal more damage for other types of similar cards, either on the bench or in the discard pile. Flower Dance deals 30 damage times the number of Bellossoms in play, so on the surface, you have a maximum of 120 damage. You can get more if you get a little more complicated in the deck, but for today's deck list, we're going to just be sticking to how do you get those 4 Bellossoms out there and start dealing 120 damage on turn 3 or 4. I've tinkered around with this deck a lot in playtesting and tried a bunch of different things, but the most consistent one that I kept coming back to for both base Neo and Neo 1 was using Dark Dragonair. Obviously, it's because of Evolutionary Light, which is going to get those evolution cards into your hand, get the Bellossoms into your hand much faster than having to rely on computer search or your professor cards. Or more accurately, Dark Dragonair is going to serve as a consistent backup to all of those types of cards. And I'll be discussing Dark Dragonair more throughout the video, so for now let's just jump right into the actual deck list. Since consistency is key for this deck, we of course will be using Cleffa. That way you can play the cards you need down, refresh your hand with an Eek, and move forward from there. Just getting your setup in your hand, and then translating that to the playing field. So a full play set of Cleffa in this deck, that way you're making sure you start the game with at least 1 Eek. The build I'm showing here is for base Neo, so you actually have a lot of options for your Oddish and Gloom cards. You can go to my favorite Oddish, which is the Rocket Oddish, a highly underrated basic Pokemon from that set. Very good early game if you do end up having to start with it as your starting Pokemon. Or even if you Eek once, you get everything you need, you can switch into this 50 HP Oddish and just start firing off disruptive attacks. And then for the Gloom, I ended up going with just the Jungle Gloom, mainly for the Poison Powder and Foul Odor attacks, continuing that disruption as you work your way up into multiple Bellossoms. I didn't find Genesis Gloom to be very helpful at all, but we're only running 2 copies of Gloom anyway, so it's not that big of a deal in this deck, not as big of a deal as the Oddish choice, actually. And then a full playset of Bellossom, that way we can try to get all of them out on the field at the same time, hit for that 120. So, like a lot of other decks in base Neo, you're going to want to get those basic Pokemon on your bench as quickly as possible. Try to get 4 Oddish down and a Dratini. That way, turn 2, you can evolve up into Dark Dragonair, start using that Evolutionary Light, get those evolution cards in your hand. On top of that, you're going to have trainer support to help you do it. Cleffa in the active position if you still need it on turn 2 or 3, especially if that first turn Eek didn't go off, if you missed a coin flip or something. If you have 2 Dark Dragonairs, you can use 2 Evolutionary Lights in the same turn. Get those Bellossoms faster, especially if you've got Pokemon Breeder in hand. That's going to help you evolve up into those Bellossoms super fast. Ideally on turn 3 or 4. You do want at least a couple of Bellossoms, if not 3, to start dealing the amount of damage you're going to need to win games in this format. And a special appearance from another highly underrated card in my opinion, Qwilfish, which is a better water type attacking alternative, I feel, to the commonly used Mantine. Qwilfish, of course, is going to serve as a fire type counter early game, try to scare off those fire types before they evolve too quickly, really get the ball rolling and steal the match out from under you, since they will be hitting Bellossom for weakness. We all know grass types really struggled throughout the early days of the TCG, mainly because fire type decks were just too fast, and speed is how you win games in the Pokemon TCG. So grass types typically need a little help from a water buddy. Also going to have 3 copies of Elm in this deck. You can go for Oak, but the risk there is always having to discard an evolution card you need just to try to get more cards into your hand. The 3 copies of Computer Search are primarily to get Pokemon Breeder into your hand, because Dark Dragonair is going to get the evolution cards into your hand. But if you're needing to go straight from Oddish to a Bellossom in a pinch, Computer Search is going to be able to get you that Breeder when you need it. Item Finder for a similar reason, to basically recycle those types of cards out of your discard to get those key cards you're going to need for knockouts, like Gust of Wind, like Pokemon Breeder. And all of the Pokemon you're going to be attacking with have relatively low HP. Bellossom only has 70, Qwilfish only has 60, Dark Dragonair only has 60, just in case it gets gusted out into the active position. So you're going to need those focus bands. In this case, I'm only using 3, but discussing it here in the moment, I'm kind of wondering why I didn't use 4. But just in case you are worried about energy removals, got a couple copies of Last. That's also going to help with Gust and Double Gust. Try to keep them out of your opponent's hand. That way you can keep your strategy going, because this is a very fragile, particular strategy you're trying to run with these Bellossoms, and there's a lot that can get in the way. Last is going to try to help control what your opponent's doing to you while you're getting your setup. 3 copies of Pokemon Breeder, so you can go straight from Oddish into those Bellossoms. Gonna help you get to that 120 damage threshold much faster by doing it this way. I tried doing it with like a 4-4-4 line of Bellossom, but the Glooms kept getting in the way. Pokemon Breeder is definitely the way to go. Couple copies of Switch, because Dark Dragonair's retreat cost is a little high. You don't want to waste energy on it. I'm not running any double colorless in this deck, so Switch is going to be the way to yank that back to the bench when it gets pulled out into the active position. Couple copies of Nightly Garbage Run to recycle those energy that you're losing to the discard, but more importantly, the Glooms and Bellossoms and Oddish even that you are losing to the discard pile. You got to continuously recycle those, or else your potential for damage is going to significantly lessen every time you lose one of those Oddish. 2 copies of Eco Gem, just in case you are getting hit with a lot of energy removals that Last isn't able to take care of, but more importantly, 2 copies of Chaos Gem, because the strategy for this deck in big part is going to be keeping your opponent from messing up your strategy. There's just so much stuff in base Neo that can ruin the setup and progression of this deck, that Chaos Gem is pretty much needed early game in order to make sure your opponent isn't just completely stopping you from evolving up into Blossoms constantly. The rest of the deck is going to be filled out with grass energy, with the exception of the very last 2 energy, which are going to be water energy for Qwilfish. Even though this is a just for fun kind of deck, I'm really glad I get to use cards like Bellossom and Qwilfish. Another strategy for this deck is to cut out the Oddish and the Glooms altogether, or at least limit them, in favor of Brock's Ninetales. That way you can attach Brock's Protection, which keeps any energy cards attached to it safe from energy removals, and just shapeshift into the Bellossoms. This is also a way to help protect your Oddish and Glooms if you're up against a lot of fire type decks, because Brock's Vulpix, Brock's Ninetales, not really going to care about fire types as much as your little plants. The major downside to this is that I play against a lot of muck decks, and that completely shuts down any form of Brock's Ninetales pretty quickly. Dark Dragonair did get reprinted in Legendary Collection, so this basic build is still viable in Neo 1. It's just that the major changes you're going to have to make are to your choice of Oddish and Gloom, and also to your trainer base. But if you've been watching the channel enough, you know what those Neo 1 base trainer builds are like. And if not, go check out my Neo 1 overview video. In playtesting I found for Neo On, I actually had the most fun when using another underrated card, Ledian. 30 damage for 2 energy is not bad, especially since there aren't a lot of grass type early game attackers like Ledian. Plus it's a hit and run attacker, and so you are dealing your 30 damage and then zipping off to the bench and passing along both of those grass energy onto a Bellossom or a Gloom. Essentially you're dealing 30 damage as part of your energy setup. Plus Ledian's got free retreat, so it makes it a little easier to get hit by Double Gust or Gust of Wind. So what I found in playtesting Ledian with Bellossom for Neo 1 is that this was an amazing turn 2 threat to opposing baby Pokemon. It scared off a lot of Clefas. If you don't like using Dark Dragonair, there is of course Pokemon Breeder Fields. Now it's not as consistent because of the coin flip, but it also only takes up a couple of slots in your deck instead of 4 slots that Dark Dragonair requires. and your opponent can't take prizes off of a Pokemon Breeders field, but they can definitely take prizes off of your Dragonairs. So it really just comes down to personal preference for if the risk is worth the consistency. Hey, that's another base Neo deck off the list. As always, let me know down in the comments what decks you would like to see next across formats, as well as any other vintage Pokemon TCG content you would want to see featured. Thanks for watching, especially you guys that are longtime channel visitors. Always leaving comments down in the comments section. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next video. Bye.